Chapter 10. Singapore Prepares, July to September 1941. July 1941 moved on in much the same way, the weather hot and unusually dry. Kenneth seems more relaxed about his situation, with plenty of sport and quite a lot of work, important for the smooth running of the dockyard, though more of a duty than a pleasure. On the 6th of July he wrote, "I haven't had a letter from you for about 3 weeks now, so you must forgive me if I sound a little depressed. After your letters I am like a lion refreshed for a few days, and then I begin to forget that I'm really living in England with you, with only my body out here, and I get lonely again. I think I've been better the last week or two though, since I got over the shock of realizing you weren't coming out to join me. Life's been very busy for the last fortnight, and I haven't had quite so much time to think. Since I last wrote to you by air, the ban on all children has been lifted completely, and even fiancés are allowed out. However, I suppose it won't shake your determination to stay. I'm afraid you're right. Certainly I think it would be a mistake to bring Jeremy, unless we intended to settle in Australia. Did I ever tell you that your painting of Lumley Croft holds the place of honour in the house? In fact, it's the only picture on the walls anywhere in the house. It hangs in the southwest corner of the sitting room, and in such a position that I can see it from my seat in the dining room. We had a Captain and Mrs. Ward to lunch the other day, and their daughter aged 19 or 20, I think. They were in Hong Kong in the 1926-27 period, and apparently know you well. Mrs. Ward was very interested to meet me because she had heard of Atkinson of the Petersfield, who had married Molly, much to everyone's surprise. She meant, of course, that you weren't expected to choose such a nonentity. They seem very nice, and I am dining with them tomorrow. Another pleasant piece of news for you is this. I had a young sub-lieutenant RNVR from one of the cruisers in here to lunch yesterday. I had never met him before, but had just asked someone to come and lunch and play golf. He saw a picture of Jane and asked if that was the famous Jane. I asked what he meant, and he said that Ross, their navigator, was a great friend of his, and had often talked of us as having a daughter called Jane, who he described as the most perfect child he'd ever seen or met. You'd better keep that to remember when Jane is really naughty. What did you think of the promotions the other day? Not many of our friends. I see Tilden got it, but not Geoffrey Moore. I was very glad Billy Ravenhill got it, and Charles Norris too. There are quite a lot we both know amongst the lieutenant commanders, Julian Liddell, the eldest casement, ex-Devonshire, Jacob, Toswell, and was the Johnston the one you know? I see that Captain Miles has been made a rear admiral and gone out with the commission to Russia. I wonder how he'll like that. I hope we don't have to go and evacuate them from somewhere. We've had the most amazing weather here lately. Not a drop of rain for 4 or 5 weeks. As you know, it usually rains every day in Singapore. Anyhow, all my grass has gone brown and the flowers are all fading away. It doesn't seem to get any hotter, although old inhabitants say it's never been so hot before. Actually, it's so nice and cool living in this house compared to living in a ship in this climate that it feels quite pleasant to me. I still haven't got Philip and Alexander of Maston that you said you were sending on to me, but I don't find very much time for reading anyhow, and at present I've dropped the history of Europe, and am reading Vicky Balm's Naked Road as a change. I had lunch with Eccles the other day, just as amusing as ever and full of life. Well, Treasure, I'm really too sleepy to write any more, and I must be fresh tomorrow for this court-martial. God bless you, my sweetheart. I'm thinking of you all the time and longing for you. All my love to you and the children. On the 10th of July, Kenneth reported having had dinner with the Hockins next door and having made $2 at bridge. The next night he dined with a couple from Sewell who had bought a 5-acre island in the middle of Keppel Harbour, cut off the top and built a house there. The Sewells were apparently the parents of a Dolly friend, the name is difficult to read in the original, and her sisters, who must have been known to Molly. The following night he was dining and playing bridge with a naval stores officer and his wife, and on the 11th he was due to dine with a Mrs. Cleeve, the wife of the Nelsons' doctor, who had been stranded in Singapore with her husband in Hong Kong. Not all these invitations were welcomed by Kenneth, but he felt obliged to accept. However, he played tennis on the 9th, and was positively brilliant. It was one of the very few days that I really played up to what I consider my standard. It happens about once every 5 years. I was hitting everything fairly hard, and exactly where I meant to, and for 3 whole sets. I hardly made a mistake, and needless to say was terribly thrilled. I don't suppose it'll happen again while I'm out here. Last time I wrote to you, I was about to be lurked for a court-martial. It came off on Monday. I was the prosecutor, and most tiring it was too. It went on from 9:30 in the morning till 6 p.m, and I had to examine every witness and of course sum up at the end. It was a very hot day, and altogether I was delighted when it was over. The accused was convicted, but I think I can safely say that it was despite my efforts, not because of them. Lurked for was a common Navy expression for being roped in unwillingly for some duty or activity. Although Singapore was still very much at peace, and the rains had come, and the kahos, Malay for gardener, though Kenneth was uncertain of the spelling, had been able to get back to work, Kenneth hadn't had a letter from Molly for a month, and he was very conscious of the war in the West, where Germany had declared war on Russia on the 22nd of June, barely 3 weeks before Kenneth wrote. The war seems to be in a very critical stage, doesn't it? I feel if Russia can go on fighting like she's reporting to be doing now, then we may yet win the war this winter. Unfortunately, one can't really believe the Russian reports, and I'm afraid, being my usual pessimistic self, I rather visualize the Russian areas behind the lines for hundreds of square miles, one mass of disorganization. They are such a hopeless race at organization to start with, and with the German methods of pulverizing communications by bombing, I can imagine them in utmost chaos now. Still, at the very worst, it will take the Germans a terrific effort, and a lot of time to organize those vast areas themselves, and even if they defeat the Russian army and air force, I can't see them leaving the country without a large and powerful garrison. In any case, it is giving England a breathing space, and I'm thankful to think that you're not getting so badly bombed as you were, and may be having a little peace. I only hope the food situation is all right too. I feel a terrible pig eating all that I can of the very best out here, including about 10 kinds of fruit at every meal, while you may be going short. I do wish you could all come out. The mere thought of it makes me almost giddy with excitement. This is a week during which, as you see, I won't have dined at home once. Isn't that terrible? And I'm afraid it goes on like that all the time too. I'm doing as little entertaining as possible myself, in the hope that people won't ask me twice, but it's terribly difficult to avoid a certain amount. The following weekend was spent with the skis, only spoiled by an afternoon at the races which Kenneth said he hated, but he did his duty by having tea in the governor's box with all the other high-ups. In the evening the skis took him to see Design for Living. Very well acted by some Australian professionals. It really was awfully good. I spent the night with the skis in Singapore and played golf this morning with Gerald. This evening, needless to say, I have been to Bukit Timah, where I played 9 holes of golf, and then join the social throng to listen to the band from 6:30 to 8 p.m. That really is the high spot of the week, and everyone is there. How I long for you on these occasions to help me enjoy them, and to show everything off to you and you to everyone. We had a Royal Marine Band this evening, and all sorts of familiar tunes. In Kenneth's next letter, the 13th of July, a Sunday, he reports that there are 4 or 5 letters from Molly waiting for him at the office. But I haven't seen them yet, and I'm longing for tomorrow morning. Sea-mail letters are taking longer and longer between us, so that you probably won't get this till the beginning of October. It seems fantastic, doesn't it? And the trouble is, I love you more and more every day, and long to have you here with me. I can hardly bear this separation, which seems to be getting worse and worse as the distance increases. I'm afraid before you get this, I shall have cabled again, and said that for God's sake come. I hope I can resist the temptation, because I know your difficulties, and the terrible danger of coming, but I can't bear to be without you. It's far, far worse than in the 1933-34, because I love you so much more, and also because this is so ideal a married job. I could spend the whole time with you, and you wouldn't get tired out with the family and household duties. It's 4 months now since the day in Glasgow when I felt so lonely at leaving you. I don't really feel so lonely now, but I long to share all this with you, more than I have longed for anything in my life. Damn war! On the 15th of July, Kenneth wrote 2 longish letters, one sea-mail and the other air-mail, starting the first in the office as he was about to be very busy in the next few days. He explained that, "I'm not giving you very much news in these sea-mail letters, I'm afraid. I keep most of what I want to say for the fortnightly clipper service. These are really to fill in the gaps, and in case the clipper mail gets lost. It seems so silly writing the same things in 2 letters, one of which arrives 8 weeks after the other. I shall try to tell you everything that matters in the airmail ones." In both letters, Kenneth reports that he had just had 4 letters from Molly, her numbers 9 to 12, dated between the 20th and the 30th of April, nearly 3 months earlier. He had also had a letter from Dorothy Rickett, and one from his aunt, Dorothy Whitmore. Despite the time gap, they had given him the happiest days since he had been in Singapore. He continued, "I also, needless to say, had a letter from Uncle Willie, and several others. It was a whole month's mail. Some of yours must be missing, because your latest was number 12, was dated April 30th, and Uncle W's was May 6th. However, perhaps that means some more in a day or 2. I'm sorry you had not heard from me by that time, except my cable from SL, which must have taken a long time. I should have thought you'd have had a letter before the end of April. I had a most amusing letter from Violet, which I'll forward when I've answered it. Anthony is not going to Dartmouth, but is awaiting the public school entry, and is going to the public school in Rhodesia. Violet, I think, is delighted to keep him in Africa for another 4 years. The business he speaks of seems to have been mainly social. Life is very full on now. Never a day goes by without either dining out or someone coming to dinner with me or the Harknesses, usually them. I have people in to bridge about twice a week, or else go out to bridge. The others are pure social and unnecessary entertainments. However, I like the life really, and I'm getting quite a lot of tennis and golf. Also, I'm feeling very fit on it, and don't feel the heat at all trying. My work seems a little less boring than at first, too. At any rate, it is varied, and I think I get worried by more people about more different subjects than I did as commander of the Nelson. The main difference being that here I usually only get attacked between 8:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m, and not on Sunday, whereas in the Nelson it was any time of day or night. In the airmail letter, Kenneth talks of a visit from a Chinese merchant at his house with his silk and lace wares. He is going back to Shanghai and trying to sell off his stock, So I got various ladies of the base to come to my house to buy, and we had the whole floor strewn with silken garments and table linen. Having just been thrilled by your letters and being terribly in love, I'm afraid I rather let myself go, and got you a few presents, including some night dresses, a lovely white mandarin's coat, and some tablecloths and napkins. I only hope you'll soon come out to enjoy them, because otherwise the others might get them. This visit was immediately followed by a small cocktail party of some of his staff. The party was rather amusingly representative of my work here. Those present included A. the labour supervisor and his wife, B. my head clerk and his wife, a very nice couple, C. the man who runs the base cinema and his wife, aged 70 and rather deaf, C. the head of the fire brigade, D. my lady typist, who is the wife of the Sultan of Johore's bandmaster and has a son at Cambridge, E. the chief of police, and F. the master rigger and his fiancée. Quite a small party, but a great success. So much of a success that they didn't go till 8 p.m, and I had a church council meeting at 8:30. I had the choice of either having some dinner or having a bath and change. Needless to say, I chose the former, and had a nice, beautifully cooked meal all by myself. Unfortunately, I hadn't time to change and got to the church in a green Airtex shirt and a pair of white flannel trousers to find my committee all beautifully dressed in Palm Beach suiting. I found, too, that I had to sit on one side of the choir stalls with the lectern in front of me while they all sat opposite in the other side. However, we got through it somehow, and here I am, now about 9:45, quite worn out, but with the feeling of a good day's work done, having been at my desk from 8:15 to 4:15 before all this happened. On Sunday, the 20th, Kenneth reported more entertaining. Another small cocktail party a couple of days earlier, small meaning about 30, to the really dull people of the base, people we know we have to ask sometime. It may give you some idea of them when I tell you that the Norgates were about the most exciting people there. Anyhow, so as not to be bored stiff, I had 3 drinks instead of my usual 1 or 2. After that I went on to dine and play bridge with Harry Reid, and 2 other temporary bachelors. We played until 2:30 a.m, and I spent the whole of yesterday recovering. When I say that, I don't mean I returned to bed or anything. Actually, I had a delightful game of golf with Ashton, and went to the pictures in Singapore afterwards with him and Scott and the Harknesses. We saw Leslie Howard, Betty Davis, and Olivia de Havilland in something called, I think, It's Love I Want. Anyhow, it was very funny, and I did not go to sleep. The same letter goes on. I'm feeling most depressed this morning because Harkness has just approached me about a thing I've known was coming for weeks. They want to turn me out of the east wing of my house. It's very reasonable, really, because they are 3 to 1, and I at present have the best rooms and 2 bathrooms. But it means the end of my house. It's now theirs, and I am a tolerated guest. The west wing isn't nearly so nice. It's dark, and my present bedroom is a lovely room open to all the light and air and overlooking the garden, and at present my most enjoyable time of the day is before breakfast, when I sit out on the veranda and have my early morning tea and survey my domain. That'll all be over now. In addition, the west wing has a few mosquitoes, or rather they have been known that end, and it means using a net at night, which I don't like. Please come out soon, and the house will be mine again, and life worth living. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. You know your coming out is all I live for, and I didn't mean to bring it up again, but I may as well mention now that the ban on assisted passages is being lifted soon, I think, and by the time you get this, everything should be cleared out of your way except submarines, so you may like to think again. Anyhow, I'm keeping up my spirits with a very little hope. Apart from the rueful return to the subject of Molly coming out to Singapore, With the implication from officialdom that the situation in the Far East was not serious, this letter finally proves beyond any doubt that CD's house in those days was not the later 118 Kings Avenue, which is oriented east-west, so has north and south wings. Number 128 does have east and west wings, and, as Kenneth's earlier sketch shows, the east wing is indeed the one with extra space and 2 bathrooms. However, both wings have verandas with a view over Kenneth's domain, the dockyard, so perhaps he was exaggerating his woe a little bit. The 20th of July letter continues with reflected news of the family, the Easter holidays at Rue, many months past. Jeremy must have had a lovely holiday with all your birds' nesting expeditions. As Du says, you sound absolutely full of energy and strength. It's always the same when you're by yourself, isn't it? Do I sap your energy, darling, when I'm there, or is it only that you just ease up because there's someone else to take the responsibility? I hope it's the latter, but even so, that rather meant that you don't relax at all when I'm not there. You mustn't wear yourself out, because I want dozens of years of your company yet, when this damned war is over, and we can live again. I wonder what the situation will be by the time you get this. The Russians seem to be doing better than most people thought, but I wonder if they are really putting up much resistance. At any rate, they seem to have done some damage to the Romanian oil wells, which is something. I'm so frightened this Russian business will put most of Europe behind Hitler. I mean, people like the Balkans, the Baltic people, and especially Spain, and even a lot of Americans. I think the worst outcome, apart from the threat to Iraq and India, may quite well turn out to be the use of Spanish ports by the Germans, and the worsening of the Atlantic situation. I hope you get out of England before that happens. Thank you for Jeremy's report. I'll send it back by the next C letter. I suppose when you get this, you'll just be about to have him back for the summer holidays. I hope they're as successful as the Easter ones, and as clear from the war. Johnny sounds marvellous. I'm longing for some more snaps of him soon. I hope you'll send some, and of the whole family, lots of them. I love the story of Jane's letter to Allsop. Perhaps, I'm afraid she'll grow up into a frightful little minx. I hope the world has come to its senses before they come along. If so, it'll be worth all this, I suppose. Though Kenneth seems only concerned with the war in Europe, war was at the time moving ever closer in the Far East. Japan had been conducting an aggressive and brutal war against China for some 4 years, to the increasing consternation of Britain and the USA. After the fall of France and Holland to the Germans, Japan had seen a chance to project its colonial interests by signing a mutual assistance pact with Germany and Italy, the Tripartite Pact of September 1940. On the 21st of July 1941, Japan and the Vichy government of the part of France unoccupied by the German army announced a mutual defence agreement, which allowed the Japanese to occupy bases in the southern parts of French Indochina, modern Laos, Vietnam and Cambodia, with their eyes firmly on the Dutch East Indies, modern Indonesia, with their oil fields. Almost immediately, on the 26th of July, the USA announced an economic blockade of Japan, covering all supplies of strategic raw materials, especially oil. Britain and Holland, whose colonies were being governed in exile from London while the homeland was under German occupation, followed suit. Kenneth's first mention of Japan was on the 27th of July, coupled with renewed misplaced optimism. If this Japanese business comes to nothing, as I imagine it will, please come out sometime this winter, because I think the Atlantic is getting safer, and you can come via Panama if you like. For the first time since the war started, I am beginning to feel a little more optimistic about it. If only the Russians can hold out as they are doing now for a few months more, I believe we shall see a German collapse next year. Meanwhile, there is other good news to report. Chevy's daughter has arrived. I haven't seen Chevy's new little daughter yet, but I believe she's just like Felicity Jean, which is rather dull. Anyhow, she's very well, and so is Pat. Chevy very nearly qualified in midwifery. He got her to the hospital about 2:30, and the doctor said the baby wouldn't arrive before 6 p.m. Pat said it would. Anyhow, at 4 p.m, the nurse went away for tea, and at about 4:20, with only Chevy there, things became desperate, and they couldn't get anyone to answer the bell. Nurse returned just in time at 4:30, and the baby was born 10 minutes later, before they had time to give Pat chloroform or anything else. And the terrible entertaining continued unabated. I've got a terrible week ahead of me, apart from work, I mean. On Monday we are dining near the C&C. On Tuesday I'm dining at Government House. On Wednesday I'm dining with one of the dockyard families that I haven't even met yet. And on Thursday I've got 7 dockyard principal officers, 3 of them with wives, dining with me. I've got a roulette wheel with which I hope to keep them amused. I can't remember what happens after that, but perhaps the Japs will intervene. On the 31st of July, Kenneth still didn't think there was much trouble brewing. It seems funny you talking about the war news in this last letter of yours. It is so out of date. You talk about the situation in Iraq being better. I suppose we hadn't even evacuated Greece then. And now all that's been practically forgotten in the Russian news. That, incidentally, seems to get better and better. They've already done better than most of us expected. However, by the time you get this, the news may be all about the Far Eastern War, or one in Iran, or Spain, or almost anywhere. I still don't think Japan will come in seriously, although that's a very rash thing to say at the moment. Anyhow, if it should break out, don't worry about me. I've got a lovely shelter, and I don't think we shall be seriously menaced, except for a few sporadic raids. In a way, I should be most grateful if it should come as you're not here. It might teach some of the locals a well-needed lesson. Next day he wrote again. As far as Japan is concerned, I think I'm right in saying that we're not so frightened of them out here as you are at home. I still don't think it will affect the result, although I quite agree that it would be madness of you to come out until we're certain. But please, darling, don't abandon the idea altogether. I should give up the ghost if you did. In reality, Japan had been bent on expansion for many years, the army seeing war as inevitable, even desirable, while the Navy hoped for access by peaceful means to vital oil supplies from the Dutch East Indies. The British government had long since decided that Singapore was defenceless against air or sea attack, unless the RAF were reinforced massively with modern planes, and Churchill had, quite rightly, decided that the defence of Britain after the fall of France must have priority over any more remote possibility of attack on Singapore. How much of this Kenneth was aware of, we cannot know. He must have picked up some inkling from his time in the Admiralty, but the censor and his desire not to alarm Molly will have kept any such knowledge or fears from his letters. So another month passed for Kenneth, with very little work and a lot of sport. Wednesday, the 6th of August. I seem to have so much less to do in working hours than I do out, that I am committing the unforgivable crime of writing to you from the office again. I don't know whether it's my passion for decentralization, or just sheer laziness, that makes me have so little work to do, whatever my job. I'm afraid my assistants here, particularly my head clerk, who is a marvel for work and knowledge, find they've got much more to do since I arrived on the scene, because my predecessor was much more conscientious than I am, and did far more himself. I've also got an assistant called Lieutenant Commander A, which stands for Administration, and he finds there's much more administration than there used to be. His name is Mallinson, and he's very nice, has been retired for some years and been in the APC out here. He's known as Marblehead by his friends. I'll leave you to guess why. Although personally I think it's rather unfair name. Kenneth had been effectively bald for many years. He attributed it to wearing a service cap, but it was more likely hereditary. I had a terrifically athletic day on Monday, and am only just recovered. I spent most of yesterday in a trance of weariness. What happened on Monday was that I had arranged to play golf after tea with a Mrs. Bailey, who is the wife of the Commander E, who lives next door to us. He never gets away from the office until about 7. No one seems to except me, so that she never gets her evening exercise. Anyhow, we went and played at the Island Club, where I hadn't played since 1934. I found it suited me admirably, and I don't think I've ever played such brilliant golf. At one time, I did 4 threes in succession, 3 of them birdies. We finished playing at 6:30, and then I had to rush back and play in a squash match for the base against a visiting ship. Well, squash at the best times isn't really a suitable game for this climate, certainly not at my age. But a squash match is criminal, and I was pitted against the champion of the ship, who incidentally was only about 22 years old. It was a 5-game match, and I was quite decided that if he was better than me, he should win by 3-love. He was better than me, and won the first game easily, and the second not quite so easily. I wasn't quite worn out by that time, so decided to make an effort to win 1 game. He, meanwhile, had eased up a bit, and had pity on my old age, and after a struggle I did win the 3rd game, although quite worn out by now. I quite decided to give away the 4th game, but apparently he was tiring too, and eventually I won that as well after being 8-8. The 5th game was a nightmare, and I simply couldn't see or think, and just put my racket in the way and stayed at the back of the court. For some unknown reason, either inexperience or because he was sorry for me in my then state, he kept hitting the ball hard instead of playing drop shots, which I'd have made no effort to retrieve, and the ball kept coming back to me. In consequence, the game went on and on. We got to 8-8 and 1 all, and eventually I won the match, and almost collapsed outside. I hardly slept that night, I was so tired, and as I say, spent most of yesterday recovering. I've just this minute got a letter from you, number 18 of May 21st. The last one I got was number 13, but I think probably 14 to 17 have arrived in the same ship as 18. They usually dribble in for about 24 hours. It enclosed a letter from Jeremy, and I was delighted to hear he was back at school, and apparently thinking about cricket and birds' eggs and not the war. I'm so glad he's got his own bat and pads and sounds keen on the game. It may be dull for parents, but it makes his life at school 10 times more fun if he really enjoys the games. I'd like him to take up tennis too, because early training in that makes such a difference later on. I expect you'll find the sports gear getting rather expensive, but I'm sure it's worth it, and I'm saving some money now so can let you have a little more if you're hard up. At any rate for the next year. After that I shall have some difficulty in paying my income tax. Your life at Goblin Combe sounds happy too, but then you are always so marvellous in your letters. I think Jane's garden sounds a grand idea. I've got lots of room for one here for her too, and she'd appreciate this place because things grow so quickly. I entirely agree with you about the pony trap. I think it's far more dangerous than a motor car, especially when everyone else is using motor cars. I've just come back from lunch. You'll be glad to hear that Mrs. Harkness supplies me with lots of salads, including raw carrot, as well as fruit of every description at every meal. Today I had the house to myself, which I like because I have my lunch immediately on arrival at about 1:10, and then get a good half-hour in a long chair afterwards before returning to the office at about 2:10. That little relaxation makes all the difference to the afternoon, which I find then goes nice and quickly till about 4:15, when I usually go home. Soon I shall have our tennis court in commission, after which I hope to get a few sets of tennis every evening. At present I get it about twice a week, usually arranged by Ch10. Pat and baby have now returned home, but I haven't seen them yet. Talking about returning home, I'm so optimistic about the war that I'm having the house repainted internally now, room by room, ready for you. I tried to get the living rooms done green, instead of off-white, as they are now with cream woodwork, but paint is rather short apparently, and I couldn't get a distemper to tone with a paint except of very dark green, so I'm having it done the same as before, much to the relief of the SCE, with only the undersides of the eaves painted green. They're supposed to be black for ARP reasons, but I refused that. I have also heard from Uncle Willie today, thanking me for my letter from Toronto. I don't know how he got the idea that I had been in Toronto, which needless to say I had not. Apparently Spaulding had just been knocked about a bit. He said he hadn't heard from you for some time. I'm glad you got my arrival cable all right, but not in time for your birthday, I'm afraid. It must have taken about 5 days. They seem to be going more quickly now. Well, treasure, I must be getting on with my work, I suppose. God bless you, my sweetheart, and the children, and all my love. From Kenneth. On the 10th of August, Kenneth had had 2 more letters from Molly, the second written on the 25th of May, though he was still missing 3 intermediate ones. The earlier one, written presumably some weeks earlier, was all about the trip down from Argyll. It was most exciting, and you certainly seem to have been luckier than on your trip up. I think you're marvellous the way you manage all these things. More and more every year do I realise how lucky I've been in finding such a wonderful wife. I'm not being sarcastic, darling, I mean it, and I love you more and more every day and week and month. There then follows a comparison with some of the base wives, who think of nothing but dressing and being catty about one another, led by Kenneth's bête noire, Mrs. Bell. Otherwise this batch of Molly's letters has cheered him up, and he has been busy again with entertaining and sport. On Friday, the 8th of August, he worked at the office all day, and then played tennis after tea with Ch10 and another couple. I'm getting very much better at tennis than I've ever been before, you'll be glad to hear. Then, after a quick bath and change, I have a dinner party all on my own, all men, consisting of the captains of various ships in harbour. Eccles, Peacock, and Sterling Hamilton were the only 3 you know, I think. We were 11 altogether, and played roulette afterwards. On Saturday, I was very busy up till 1 p.m, including showing off our Indian police force to the Maharaja of Patiala, a most inspiring figure of a man. In the afternoon I played golf with Peacock, Bill Ashton, and another army officer. Ashton and Kenneth Scott came to dinner afterwards. We went on to the pictures in Singapore with the Harknesses. We saw Pride and Prejudice with Greer Garson, Laurence Olivier, and Margaret Sullivan. It was very good, but not quite as good as the play which we saw together, didn't we, in London? Today I've played golf all day at Bukit Timah with Ashton, Peacock, and one other, and am tired out and burning a little with the sun. We stayed listening to the band till about 7:45, and then I came to a quiet supper of about 5 courses served by several Chinese boys, in order to spend the evening alone with Molly's letters. This letter, Sunday the 10th of August, also enclosed the photographs of his house and garden, taken by Mrs. Harkness from the veranda, with a sketch to indicate the views. Kenneth's comments on the war note the dreadful loss of the Hood, and the belief that Gerald Gladstone, his old colleague from the World Cruise, must have been lost in the Fiji, but I hope to God he wasn't. August continued with the same round of official duties and sport, reported in long letters. On the 12th, Kenneth wrote, "I forgot to tell you about our Asiatic school sports the other day. I am president of the school, or whatever it's called, and when I visit them there's a mass squeal of 'Good morning, sir' from dozens of baby throats. I think there are about 160 of them, of all shades of black and yellow in form classes. The sports were great fun, and we had both admirals and their wives to watch. The little girls in Chinese and Indian dresses taking part in all sorts of races were perfectly sweet. I'm sending Jeremy the photo of the prize winners when I get it. There was one sweet little Chinese boy, aged about 5 or 6, and very small, who had a most distressing experience. In the potato race for the babies, they each had to pick up 6 potatoes from a line of potatoes in the grass, and put them separately in their own bucket at the end of the line. Well, the grass was fairly long, and the potatoes rather small, and when everyone else had finished, taken away their buckets, and were leaving the field with the judges, he was still searching for his 6th potato, and when he couldn't find it, he stood still in the middle of the field with the quaintest look of despair, asking for sympathy from the hundreds of spectators. I've seldom seen anything so pathetic, and he only got laughs. No one on the field took the slightest notice of him, and he eventually walked away all by himself, but very sad. Any European child would have been in floods of tears. I wish our children had seen him. It would have been an object lesson to them, and I wish also that I could have been able to paint the scene and catch his expression." We had a gala performance of the picture Lady Hamilton last night. About once a month they have one of these shows in aid of a Buy a Bomber fund. I had Mrs. Fenton, Pat Chevalier's mother, and Colonel Ashton to dinner, and took them to it. Laurence Olivier and Vivian Leigh were in it, and it was perfectly marvellous. This evening we had a most amusing tennis game. I must tell you that I have been received into the snobbish tennis clique who play at the Little Planters Club here, and everyone is good at tennis. I mean tennis snobs, not social ones, and very good for my tennis it is. Anyhow, today Joan Harkness and I were asked to play on the dockyard courts with the Civil Secretary and his wife, who live next door to us. There followed some rather catty remarks about the wives of colleagues, including inevitably Mrs. Bell, which were continued on the 18th of August. We had a frightful party on Saturday night, which I know I was going to loathe, and in consequence I drank rather more than my usual quota of gin to make myself cheerful. Don't worry, treasure, my usual quota is very small. The party was at the Bells, and I'd have refused except I've been so rude to Mrs. Bell, who knows I dislike her intensely, that I had to accept or have an open breach. It was one of these artificially jolly parties with which I can't compete, and typical of Mrs. Bell, who can't relax her efforts for 5 minutes. We were asked for 8 p.m, and there were about 20 guests. I told Mrs. Bell I was going at 10:30, whatever happened, but we didn't feed till 10:15. After that people were jolly, and did their parlour tricks such as cockfighting and turning cartwheels, etc. I slipped away for some fresh air and walked home to fetch my pipe and tobacco, returning about 11:30. Then at 12:15 they started playing charades, so I quickly slipped away again and went to bed. I don't believe they stopped till about 2 a.m. Anyhow, I didn't feel my best today, and in addition had a very busy day. I went to church at 8 a.m. and again at 9:30, and had to read the lesson at that service. Immediately after that, I went on to an Indian club meeting in the local cinema. I am de facto president of all these clubs and supposed to be presiding on this occasion, but had to come in the middle because of church. Everyone, about 600 Indians, stood up on my arrival and clapped, and I was presented with a bouquet and a garland of flowers put round my neck, mostly of temple flowers, gardenias, and the very sickly-smelling things. I had to make a speech, which I suppose about 200 understood, and then sit on the stage with the other speakers for about an hour and listen to speeches in Indian. Eventually I excused myself and went to my office, where I worked till 1 p.m, then home to lunch. After lunch I went out to Ch10 with Peacock and played golf, which improved my health at last. But I didn't get home till 7:50, and we had some people dining with us at 8 p.m. So you see, all I had time for was to say good night to you after they'd gone. I don't think there's really much news this fortnight. I've played a tremendous lot of tennis, and I'm really getting quite good. Of course, conditions are always perfect. There's never any wind, and the courts are first class, and those are the conditions one so seldom gets at home. And I like playing games in the hot sun and always feel so much better. We only play about 3 sets every evening, as we seldom start before 5, and it's too dark by 6:30. But we always have just 4, so that there's no sitting out and waiting. In fact, it's just as I like tennis. Our court is a going concern, although I'm afraid the surface isn't all it might be yet. We have it rolled early every morning, and I think by the time you get out here it should be first class. It's very big. I mean, there's about 20 feet at each end before the stop netting, and it's really very pretty too, except for the black posts of the stop netting, which rather spoil the appearance of the garden. I'm told they tone down eventually, but they have to be selignumed to prevent them rotting, and you can't paint them green or any other colour over the selignum. Sport still features importantly, and on the 29th of August, Kenneth records a typical day. I've just realised that I'm going to have a really rushed weekend. What with the golf and going out in the evenings, I shan't have any time until Monday to write another word. So I must do the best I can now and finish off on Monday morning. Life goes by very quickly here, because one never seems to have a minute to oneself. The weekends and ends of months seem to rush on top of one before you know where you are. I don't know why it's such a rush, but it always is. Today, for instance, I got up at 6:15, spent up to 9 in the dockyard moving ships, went home for breakfast by 9:15 and then back to the office. There I stayed, except for an hour for lunch, until 4:20. Got back and had a cup of tea while I changed. Started tennis at 4:45 on our own court. A great success it is now, with the best surround and back cloths in Singapore. I've now just had a bath and changed, and I'm feeling grand, but I've got to dine out in half an hour's time. Luckily only next door, but nevertheless it means a latish night. Tomorrow, office till 1 p.m. 2 p.m. I start to motor to golf, where we have a starting time of 2:40. After golf, Kenneth Scott meets me at Ch10 and takes me in to dinner in Singapore. I also had an invitation to dine with the governor, but was told I could refuse without mortally offending him. That's Saturday gone. Sunday we have golf all day, with a list starting time at 9:10, which means leaving home at 8:30. And in the evening Peacock and I are dining at one of the RAF stations, and that's Sunday, and not a minute at home at all. However, it does make the time go quickly, and that means a sort of anaesthetic till you come. Between details of parties and tennis and golf, we still see reflections of and on life at home, for me at school and for others at Goblin Combe. St Andrew's School had had an epidemic of scarlet fever in the spring term, though mine came in the summer term. Apart from the dramatics described earlier, I also watched birds from my window, but never saw anything more interesting than rooks and wood pigeons. This incident is reflected in Kenneth's letters of the 26th and 28th of August. How very sad about Jeremy getting scarlet fever. I imagine, as I've heard no more, that he has recovered all right, but even so it must have completely spoiled his summer term for him. Poor boy, I hope he managed to get some fun out of the term, and had some cricket and swimming. I suppose that anyhow he was done out of his form prize, which he would certainly have got if he had stayed all the term. Poor boy, it was rotten luck when he was doing so well, and was probably just getting old enough to enjoy cricket and swimming as well. I suppose he lost all the rest of the summer term, and only just got well in time for the holidays. He must be still at home with you now, I suppose. I mean when you get this letter. I do hope you've had a lovely summer holiday, and that he won't miss any of the next term. Actually, I was quite thankful to miss cricket, and remember being very nervous of getting back to it at the very end of term. Whether missing so much cricket made me self-conscious about my inability to bowl, or whether I disliked cricket before that term, I cannot remember. Later I was found to be short-sighted, which added another hazard, especially facing fast bowling, even when I started to wear glasses. Saturday the 23rd of August was a very important day for the dockyard. Rear Admiral Spooner had arrived to relieve Admiral Drew as Admiral Superintendent. Admiral and Mrs. Spooner arrived yesterday. I haven't met her yet. They are living in the new Admiral's house in the base, the Drews having lived in Singapore. He looks very much the same as usual, and talks just as much. He'll be a great addition to our golf and tennis clique. Strange how one's thoughts move out here, isn't it? A few days later, Kenneth added, I went with the Spooners to dinner with the Drews on Wednesday, 27th of August. Mrs. Spooner is just the same and looks very sweet, and she hates Singapore, and they've gone into the Admiral Superintendent's house, which has only recently been finished, and of course they reckon it'll take 6 months to make it livable in. He is full of energy, but I'm afraid he'll find a dockyard more than he bargains for. At present he's rushing round trying to put everything right at once, and it's a difficult job to get a move on, in a dockyard, especially when all the labourers and mechanics, etc. are Asiatic, and don't know what busy or hustle mean. Jack Spooner had been Kenneth's captain in HMS Dryad, the navigation school, in 1936, and Kenneth knew him well, as he hints in his next reference 3 days later. It's very funny having him as my boss again. It brings back memories of the days when Nellie Weeks and I used to relieve one another in his office at the nav school, so that one of us at least could get on with our work. He is still very much the same, full of life, but likes talking for hours on end. His secretary is Cole, who used to play centre-half at hockey. Do you remember? With a nice Canadian wife. She's on her way here too, from Vancouver. We had quite an amusing dinner party last night. We were giving a small farewell party to Admiral and Mrs. Drew, and had about 8 others to keep them company, but nice, cheerful people. We played a little roulette afterwards, and then there was a most flattering meeting round the photographs of you and the baby and Jane with her bunny. I almost blushed for you both. They were, of course, amazed that I could have a daughter like Jane, and that a lovely creature like you should ever have married me. However, I explained, of course, that even the camera can lie. Kenneth Scott, who hadn't seen that coloured one of Jane, almost wanted to take the next clipper back to England to see her. The war still seemed far away from Singapore towards the end of August, and Kenneth was still dreaming of Molly joining him. The future of China was on his mind, the 24th of August, but with no sense of immediate danger. I'm so glad you appreciate the House of Exile. I loved it, and it made one so furious that the Chinese are being made to conform to Western methods and ideas, as they are now by those nasty little Japs who are continuing our work. I suppose, really, one must blame modern communications and the consequent shrinking of the world for it all. They were bound to follow what we call civilization eventually, whether the Japanese hurried it on with this war or not. Are we in for a world of large democracies after this war, I wonder? America, Russia, China, India, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, etc. I think we shall gradually develop larger and larger entities until we just have Europe, Asia, Africa, etc. Not in our time, though, and all I want is peace, so that I can have my family again. I want to see Jonathan terribly. He sounds most entertaining and almost perfect. I swank tremendously about you and my children out here, I'm afraid, darling, but they won't be disappointed in the reality. More and more wives are arriving almost every day, so don't leave me the only bachelor. 2 days later, he wrote even more optimistically. As you notice, the Far Eastern crisis seems to have died down a bit again. I can't believe Japan is strong enough to risk anything unless Russia or ourselves crack somewhere in the West. I'm sure I shall have you with me in the spring, and you can safely bring Jane as well as Jonathan. The schools up country are excellent. Kenneth's September letters opened on the 1st of September with, I wonder what will come of the Japanese-American talks. Wouldn't it be marvellous if we had a Far Eastern peace conference? I can see that it's possible because I think all sensible Japanese really want peace, as they must be worn out with war, and their last few months' efforts have been entirely bluff and bluster. If we do have peace, come out this winter, won't you, darling, before the Atlantic becomes too dangerous again. There must be lots of passages vacant across to America, and you could easily come via Panama if necessary. I can cable an extra £200 if you want it, as I haven't spent the £200 sent me by the bank. I managed to pay for my car out of my savings and the money I brought out. I shall be thrilled when I hear you're coming, although I still quite realise that the children must come first, and I'm not trying to rush you. I can't help longing day and night for you. On the 4th of September his optimism, or wishful thinking, were returning. The war news is still encouraging, I think, and especially the Atlantic situation. I shall feel much happier about you at sea this winter than I would if you had come out in June or July. Of course, it may all change again, and I'm quite confident about you setting out in January, and have got a bottle of champagne and one of the Kümmel waiting for you. Half the house has been painted and is looking lovely, but I am waiting to have the east wing done till I know you're coming. He also again reflected the family's life at home during the summer holidays. I'm delighted to hear that Jane can swim by herself. We'll have terrific fun when you all come here, because if petrol rationing is tightened up even more, we can always get to the naval swimming bath in the base, which a lot of children go to now. The Harknesses' little daughter goes there most days, and she can just swim without a ring now. Some of the babies are marvellous, and they seem to learn to swim at about 3. Perhaps we'll even teach Johnny. Poor Jeremy, he must have been miserable at missing all the lovely summer term. I hope he doesn't read too much and hurt his eyes. Your second-hand book choices sound excellent. He'll probably learn just as much as he would have done in school, but he'll miss the cricket and swimming. The book choices included Dickens's Little Dorrit and a couple of Walter Scott novels. Quentin Durward was one, and Red Gauntlet. I think I found them heavy going. Who wouldn't at the age of not quite 11? But in later life I certainly enjoyed Scott. Meanwhile, the social and sporting life went on at the base, and occasionally in Singapore. On the 3rd of September, a party went to an amateur dramatic show. It was called Spring Meeting, and was all supposed to be an Irish brogue. As 6 out of 9 of the performers had never acted before, you can imagine that it wasn't very good. However, I'd promised one of them that I'd bring a large party and do my best for them, so we all clapped and laughed in unison at what we thought were the right moments, and actually quite enjoyed ourselves. We went behind the scenes afterwards and told them how good we thought they were. As a matter of fact, we had been warned it was terrible. The C&C reported that he considered that he had expiated 42 years of sin by sitting through it, and we were rather agreeably surprised. Unfortunately, our petrol ration only allows of about 1 trip a month to Singapore, so it really is rather deserving of credit in heaven to waste that 1 trip on an ADS show of proved mediocrity. On the 7th of September, Kenneth showed a different side to his personality. We've just had our intercession service, and it was really rather impressive. We had Kipling's Recessional, which I always loved to sing most lustily, although I'm sure every note is out of tune. I wonder if we really are going to have a religious revival. I often think about it these days, and I'm not sure it isn't our only hope. There must be a raison d'etre in this, and we may need these wars and troubles to bring us back to our senses. People do turn to God in these times, at least I know I do, and I suppose many others do. Also, I can't see how we can settle Europe after the war without religion. We often talk about the Muslim world or nations, and there is certainly no other natural bond amongst the people of Europe other than Christianity. I wonder if that could be made the basis of a reorganisation. On the 10th of September, Kenneth wrote of the change in his working life, around which his sporting activities revolved, but he also found time to comment on the state of the garden and the war. I'm afraid this may be rather a short letter, because for a change I'm really quite busy over my work. Since Admiral Spooner arrived, my work has been multiplied by about 10. Not only does he foist all sorts of things onto me, but I have to explain lots of things to him which of course the late Admiral knew better than I did. Also, he talks so much and refuses to listen that very small questions take hours to get settled sometimes. However, he's certainly full of energy and intends to shake everything up here or know the reason why. Anyhow, it's been 5:30 before I've got away from my office these last 2 days, and 8:30 to 5:30 with less than an hour off for lunch is a long time in an office in this climate. Not that I really spend all that time at my desk. There's a lot of rushing around to be done. I must say I find it a strain when I don't get an hour's tennis in the evening, and feel much more tired when I just come back from the office and read the paper for an hour before changing for dinner, or write letters as I am doing this evening. On the days when I rush away from the office at 4:30, change in a terrific hurry, dash to the tennis, play 4 strenuous sets and then come back just in time for a bath before dinner, I feel as fresh as a daisy. I'm quite certain in my own mind that exercise is essential here, and certainly in the last 2 months when I've played so much tennis and golf, I felt fitter than ever in my life before, I think. I understand a long-delayed sea mail has just arrived in Singapore, so I hope that tomorrow I may get your 2 missing letters, number 22 and 23. I got a parcel mail yesterday, Philip and Alexander, from you, and With Love and Irony, by Lin Yutang from the Times Book Club. I thought I'd ordered that for you, but it seems to have turned up here and is certainly very pleasant reading. All my quengoirs, moonflowers, came out on Sunday night. There were 10 blossoms and I could smell them from the front gate, about 80 yards away when I came home at night. They really are the most lovely things I've ever seen, I think. As I think I must have told you, they grow out of the side of the leaves like cacti flowers, from an old thing that looks something like a rather moth-eaten aspidistra. They flower for 1 night only at the full moon, usually about once every 4 to 6 months out here, and look like very large white water lilies. Each flower being about 6 inches to 7 inches across, and about 3 inches to 4 inches deep. They've got the most heavenly scent, too. The war news seems almost too good to be true these days, doesn't it? I wonder if the Russians really will hold the Nazis short of Leningrad, Kiev and Dnieper. It looks almost possible now. If so, I feel we really may be able to attack them seriously next year, both in the Middle East and in the West, And also I don't think Japan will dare to move, and then, and much the most important, you'll be able to come out and join me. Do you realize it's 6 months since I left you? And it's 6 months too long, my treasure. It's jolly good for me because it makes me realize how terribly much I love you and look to you to help me. I remember a time not many years ago when I used to think that if I ever lost you, I should marry again as soon as possible because I loved married life and should hate to be single again. But I thought I should find someone to replace you. Now I know I shouldn't. I've got past that stage and I realize that no one could possibly take your place. 3 days later the sea mail had arrived, and one reason for the base being busy was revealed: the arrival of an important visitor. My sweetheart, once again I'm writing in my office, but this time fairly late at night. I played golf this afternoon, but as I had a lot of work to do, came back here after supper to finish it off, and I'm staying here to write this because I know I should go to sleep if I tried to write it at home. I had 2 airmail letters yesterday, not Clipper, and they took 11 weeks and 10 weeks respectively. One from your father about Lumley, and very cheering, and the other from the bank, and not so cheering. I don't understand what they're talking about, so I'm wasting some of my half-ounce by enclosing a letter from them. Will you please read it, and then send it on? I also had your 2 missing letters, 22 and 23, the other day, so that now I am up to date to number 28, and not a single one missing. These were the 5th and 9th of June, and had been, I think, all round the oceans. I am interested to hear that you are learning typing. Perhaps when you come out here, you'll be able to fill in the post of my TWA, Temporary Woman Assistant. She types for me from 8:30 to 1300 every day, and only does typing, not shorthand. So you would have the afternoons off and earn about £8 a month too. However, it's not at all necessary, and actually none of the senior officers' wives out here are allowed to work at present, but are usually occupied in voluntary jobs, such as knitting parties and Red Cross. Or perhaps you could start the Brownies. I have to sponsor the Boy Scouts and Cubs. Poor you. You did have a succession of illnesses to cope with the children, didn't you? I do hope they stand the winter better. I'm sure what they need is a nice ocean passage and lots of good food and fruit. I've had a most exhausting day today. As you know from the papers, Duff Cooper has arrived out here. Well, after 2 hours of Admiral Spooner, I had to show DC round the base from 10:45 until 12:30. I then had a very hectic half-hour in my office trying to cope with a whole day's paperwork, hence my visit this evening. Got back to a very hurried lunch, and at 1:45 Peacock picked me up to take me to Phuket Timar for golf. No time to waste, as Saturday afternoons are very crowded, and one has to book a time, and if one's 2 minutes late, may have to wait 2 hours. When about halfway there, we were going along a straight bit of road, which had just been wet by a shower, when we started to skid. We went from side to side of the road, turned broadside on, skidded another 10 yards or so, hit the near side of the road, turned right round, and went backwards into the ditch. Luckily we remained the right way up, and no harm was done except slight damage to the car, and also we couldn't get it out of the ditch. Luckily, within 2 minutes, 2 different cars, each with friends of mine in them, came past, and we left the car and were taken on to make our golf date, which we did with about half a minute to spare. I may say we both got bogeys at the first hole and won our match, a 4-ball by 3 and 1. I think it's my first car smash, and not a very serious one. Luckily, nothing was coming the other way at the time, and we kept on the road long enough to slow our speed of advance down to about 5 miles an hour before we entered the ditch backwards. We got back in my car, as I had arranged for my Scythe to come and fetch me from Phuket Timar at 7 o'clock. I then had a quick supper and did an hour or so's work before starting this letter. Tomorrow is my Sunday off. The weekend I write my clipper letter to you always is, until we have a 5th Sunday in the month again, when I get out of step again. Last Sunday we had an intercession service, and the C&C read the lesson instead of me, so I shall have had quite a long holiday. My tennis court is coming in for quite a lot of play now, and we had a particularly good game on Thursday with Ch10 and Mockler, ex-Navy champion, and Blackham, who is a young navigator you may remember, the same lot as Ross and Steele and Donkin, all of whom are out here. I find myself quite up to these expert standards now, and I thoroughly enjoy it. My garden is getting lovely too, since we've had some rain lately, and is full of colour. It'll be even better when you come, because we shall be able to do a little gardening ourselves in the evenings, or at least some supervision of the gardeners. At present I sometimes do a little before breakfast, and occasionally on a wet evening, but the gardeners are left too much to themselves. I must finish this letter on this page, partly because of the time and partly because of the weight. I am enclosing a few stamps for Jeremy because I hope this will arrive just before his birthday. Will you please send them on with my love? I do hope he's having a happy term. I am longing to be with you, my darling, and I feel I'm slacking in this war. While most of the Navy is working and fighting hard, I am playing and enjoying myself in one of the pleasantest spots in the world. I can't help it though, although I know I shall regret it after the war, and shall miss a lot of valuable service experience. God bless you, my treasure, and J, and all my love. Kenneth. None of the grand strategy which occasioned Duff Cooper's visit is reflected in Kenneth's letters. Indeed, his only references to the Admiralty concerned income tax arrangements and the eternal commentary on wives and families still arriving in Singapore. For example, on the 18th of September. What happens is that the Admiralty give us a colonial allowance to make up for the high cost of living out here, and then charge us 10 shillings in the pound income tax on it. When this was pointed out, they doubled the colonial allowance, which had no effect on our pay, or practically none, because it put us into the region of super tax, and therefore increased our income tax out of all proportion, and that income tax we unfortunately pay a year late, so that when I get home my pay will be, say, £1,100 a year, and I shall be paying income tax on, say, £1,900 a year, which I get now, which comes to about £900. I had a marvellous dream last night. I was made Admiral Superintendent out here. I don't know if that means I'm getting above myself, and was therefore able to send to the Admiralty to say I wanted my wife and children sent out at once, as it was necessary for entertaining reasons that I should have you here. I suppose you'll get this not long before Christmas. Please come after the Christmas holiday, darling, if the situation is still quiet. I need you very badly. I'm getting crusty and unpleasant, and find it increasingly difficult not to be rude to everyone. I hate seeing all these people enjoying life with their families and no worries, and to feel that I'm wasting such a lovely chance to be with you all the time. Not just weekends, but every day and every night. You'd so love it too. The standard rate of income tax was 50%, payable in arrears. As far as I remember, super tax went up to 19 shillings and sixpence in the pound, 97.5%. But from the figures given, it is not possible to calculate what rate Kenneth was paying. We can be sure that Kenneth's motivation to do his job to the best of his ability was not reduced by the high taxation, though the absence of Molly is still getting him down. The dream shows how much the war is still very much in the background, but the imagined promotion was ironically prescient. However, there are other distractions. In the same letter he had been to the Sultan of Johore's birthday levee. It was the most astonishing party, starting at 9 a.m. We just assembled at the mosque and prayed, and then we had a proper royal levee, only attended with true Oriental pomp and splendour. As one of the senior government officials, I hold an appointment as naval officer in charge of Johore waters, I was one of the few selected to be presented personally and had to go up and do my bow in front of the Sultan and Lady Ibrahim. After that, some of the principal Malay and Chinese officials were decorated with various birthday honours. Then we all had tea and coffee and cakes and champagne, and I didn't get away till nearly noon. Lady Ibrahim is the Sultan's fourth wife and is rather an attractive Romanian, of about 30 to 35, I should think. He is 68, but is still very hale and hearty. Preparations for the war were nevertheless in hand, despite the entertaining and the endless tennis, golf, bridge and other distractions, and despite the absence of the fleet. On Monday night, the 14th of September, I spent a couple of hours in the air in a modern bomber, viewing the blackout from above. It was most interesting, because I've only done it before in an old open aeroplane, and it's astonishing what little you can see from a closed-in plane at night. I think it's marvellous that our bombers ever find their correct targets, if they do, except of course on moonlit nights, and by means of flares. I have no idea what this modern bomber might have been, but it is unlikely that it was truly modern even for 1941. It may have been a Vickers wildebeest, of which there were quite a number in Singapore. This plane is described by Elphick as obsolete, with a top speed of about 100 miles an hour. Molly joining him is becoming a reality again in Kenneth's mind, as the next letter shows. Sunday, the 21st of September. I meant to come back early and spend the evening with you, as it were, but, as usually happens on Sunday evenings, we listened to the band at Bukit Timah and dawdled over our whisky and soda, and eventually didn't get back here till about 9:30. We being Peacock and me. As usual with Chinese boys, supper was perfectly cooked even at that late hour, and although it's 10:30, I've only just got rid of Peacock, and am able to start this letter. We've had a very pleasant day. I had an easy lesson to read in church, and a couple of hours in the office, and then the afternoon's golf. I was out dancing last night, a most unusual thing for me, and I think the exercise must have done me good, because although I didn't get to bed till after 2 a.m, I felt fitter than usual today. It was a most amusing party last night given by the American Naval Liaison Officer here. I discovered in the morning that the party consisted of 10 men and 4 girls, 2 of the girls being extremely dull and almost in their 50s, and the other 2 being captains' wives and therefore rather too old for me. Consequently, I asked Harkness, to whom no ulterior motive could possibly be attributed, to suggest to the American NLO that he might like a little more female blood in the party. Luckily, he was delighted, and we got 2 attractive army officers' grass widows who are TWAs in Harkness's office, so the party in the end was a great success. I must say I do like a party like that occasionally, as you know, especially as here I have got the reputation of a very dull bore who always refuses all invitations and therefore seldom goes out. I'm afraid I've been very rude to several people, but I find that the other senior officers here feel they must stick together, and if I didn't dig my toes in and pretend to be a recluse, I should spend 3 out of every 4 nights at full dinner parties with my fellow senior officers and their dull wives. There's a very good excuse in the war, and also one can always say that in this climate one can't have late nights and then work in an office all day. Actually, that's not quite true, because I find late nights affect one less in a hot climate, especially if one doesn't smoke, than they do at home. I have cleared up this question of wives doing war work out here, and think the C&C is going to make a signal to the Admiralty, telling them that that is in no way a condition. So I hope when you try to get a passage that they won't mention it. I hope you'll leave England before February 28th, because Johnny travels free under 2 years old, doesn't he? Not that I really want you to take that into account, and if the war continues to prosper from our point of view, I still think the Admiralty will pay your passage, although they haven't agreed to it yet. I do want you out here terribly, my darling, provided you don't think the children will suffer too much. I must go to bed, otherwise I shall get sloppy. I always feel it at this time of night. The next day, Kenneth reported that he had had his first game of hockey the previous week. Chevy took me to play for the cricket club against an Indian regiment. I quite enjoyed it, but I refused to join the club or to play regularly, partly because it's too expensive in petrol. Most of the games are in Singapore, and 30 miles takes at least one of the very valuable coupons. Also, I get quite enough exercise with the tennis and golf, and don't really enjoy hockey these days, because I'm getting slow and can't quite do what I know I ought to. Unless I played regularly, I shouldn't enjoy it anyhow. We're having a lovely downpour of rain at the moment, and I can almost hear the things in the garden growing. I'm longing to show you my garden here. On the 24th of September, Kenneth noted that he hadn't had a letter from Molly for 3 weeks. I know it's not your fault, and I suppose one can't grumble about mails these days, but after about a week without hearing from you, I begin to get a bit depressed. It's lucky I'm not in Tobruk, or in a cruiser searching the wide oceans, isn't it? He goes on to say that he had just had a hot bath after tennis, and was at peace with the world, though, to save fuel, we never light our hot water boiler except from 6 to 8 in the evenings, so in the morning I bravely run under a cold shower and do a sort of Tarzan touch. He had also been suffering from indigestion, which he attributed to the lovely curries and Chinese chows our cookie produces, combined with too much pipe smoking. He had also been to the local dockyard cinema with the Chevaliers, to see Anne Sheridan in something. I don't believe I've ever seen her. The local cinema is not very good, and at present it's more expensive than the best air-conditioned cinema in Singapore. But we're cutting the prices by 50% next week, and anyhow it means a wonderful saving of petrol, of course, which is more precious than gold these days. I never use my car at all if I can possibly avoid it during the week, so as to make certain of getting my weekend golf in Bukit Timah. Luckily, Peacock is here and has now managed to borrow a car, so that we only use one between us, and I've managed the month so far with only half my coupons.